Yo, what's good, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy Podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson. I will be your host, and in this episode, we're going to be going over my Week 11 starts of the week for the 2024 fantasy football season. This is episode 26. I'm recording this on November 16th, Saturday, 2024. I'm still up from Friday, but it's very early in the morning, we'll say, on Saturday. So if news breaks after I post this podcast, use common sense. I always say, if I tell you to start a wide receiver and their quarterback gets ruled out with a sudden injury or something like that, or a player gets added to the injury report late in the week, then that will affect my view on that player and the likelihood of them doing well for fantasy. But if you guys ever watch the video podcast, Fantasy Football Prodigy on YouTube, you might notice a different background. I just moved, so that is why there's been a bit of a lack of content lately, but I'm getting settled in, so hopefully the podcasts will be able to actually be a little bit more consistent now that I have my setup and I have a place to call home. If you do want to watch on YouTube, you can head over to Fantasy Football Prodigy on YouTube, but if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or wherever you are enjoying the podcast, please make sure to like. Can you like podcasts on anything other than YouTube? I don't know. Leave a good review, follow, and because you want to stay tuned, because my goal here is to make you all fantasy football prodigies, just like myself. Why should you listen to my advice? Well, I'm 9-1 in all three of my main fantasy football leagues. I'm still alive in my guillotine league. And honestly, I never miss. Unless I post a player on my TikTok, then that player usually does bad. But I'm not sure who I'm going to post yet. So you'll have to follow the TikTok to know who I post there, to maybe give a second thought to that. The TikTok is, what even is my TikTok? I think it's FFP. Right? It's the Fantasy Football Prodigy. Fantasy Football Prodigy, like with a DA. FFP. I don't know what's the username and what's the other thing. But anyways, I'm rambling. Let's get right into the starts of the week. We're going to go position by position. I'm going to give you guys who aren't people you would just automatically start, or if it is a player who is probably an auto start or someone that you are starting, I'm only highlighting them because I think they are in a particularly good situation where they could win you a week, exploit a really good matchup. But other than that, I'm going to give you some guys who might be a little bit under the radar, maybe someone who's been disappointing for a little bit, but I think they're going to bounce back. So I'm not going to, come out here and tell you to start Justin Jefferson, or to start Josh Allen, because those guys, should be in your lineup every week. And yeah, you get the point. We're going to start with the quarterback position. So first, quarterback start of the week, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers at home versus the Seattle Seahawks. This game has a 48-point over-under. Brock Purdy is the quarterback 7 in points per game on the season, and now he gets a good matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. Brock Purdy lit up the Seahawks for 253 in week 6. He has weapons with Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings, who popped up on the injury report later in the week, so monitor that. I do like him as a solid streamer, but that late addition to the injury report kind of makes things a little more muddy. But even outside of that, he has Deebo, he has George Kittle, he has Ricky Pearsall, and CMC is back from injury, which helps move the offense, and he is a receiving threat out of the backfield. Brock Purdy is a high-end quarterback 1 in week 11. That is my first quarterback start of the week, ladies and gentlemen. I got a couple more for you, actually. Sometimes I do one per position. Sometimes I do a handful. It just depends on what I'm feeling. I don't want to just force myself to give you extra advice if I don't think you need it, or if no one is really standing out, then obviously I don't feel the need to bring them up. But there are a few quarterbacks this week in week 11 that I think are in good spots to maybe outproduce their expectations. So next up, we got Quarterback start of the week, Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos at home versus the Atlanta Falcons. This game has a 45-point over-under. The rookie has quietly been great for fantasy after a shaky first couple of weeks to start the season. He's the quarterback 13 on the year in points per game, but if you take out those first 2 weeks where he struggled and was getting his feet wet in the league, he has been the quarterback 8 in points per game from weeks 3 to 10. If you don't know, Nix actually offers decent rushing upside, averaging about 29 rushing yards per game, and he has 4 total rushing touchdowns on the season to go along with his passing production. Fantasy rushing is scoring. That is not how you say that sentence. Fantasy rushing scoring is broken for quarterbacks. So even that amount of rushing production offers Bo Nix a bit of a floor each week. His opponent, the Atlanta Falcons, gave up the 7th most points per game to quarterbacks on the season. He's an underrated fantasy quarterback in general. He is a low to mid quarterback 1 play in week 11. And also, he has a really good schedule coming up if you do need quarterback help to end the season and even into the playoffs if you don't have a locked in starter. Bo Nix, I like him a lot. I like Bo Nix this week. I have a league where I didn't really, I kept getting sniped on like those mid to late round quarterbacks. So I was kind of rolling with like Geno Smith, Kirk Cousin type quarterbacks out there. I had Justin Fields for a minute, I think, until he got benched. But I picked up Bo Nix and he's been my guy. I even played him last week against the Chiefs, even though it was a tough matchup, just because I didn't really want to drop anyone else on my roster. And he came through, I think it was like about 16 points on the road in Kansas City. Like that's not great, but that just shows kind of his floor to even put up that production in a bad matchup on the road. And in his good matchups, he's been excellent. He runs the ball. Courtland Sutton, who we'll maybe talk about later, he's kind of emerged as a solid number 1 option. And especially when he's able to run one in the end zone, like he has been actually very good for fantasy, very regularly in those upper teen points, to even like in the 20s, on the reg. I mean, he has 3 20 point plus performances this week. Week 8, he had just under 30 against the Panthers. So, a guy you probably want to play in the right matchup, but I've talked about Bo Nix long enough. I just want to also say, though, I tried to draft him in the 4th round of my single quarterback dynasty league, and I didn't have a 4th round pick, and I kept trying to trade because I wanted to get Bo Nix because I thought he's being overlooked a little bit. And dang it, I wish I was able to pull that off because now he's probably going to cost a 3rd round pick in dynasty. Anyways, moving on. I have one more quarterback start of the week. Quarterback start of the week, Russell Wilson of the Pittsburgh Steelers at home versus the Baltimore Ravens. This game has a 48.5 point over-under. Russ was left for dead during his Denver Broncos days, but since taking over as the starter for Pittsburgh this season in week 7, he has had a bit of a career resurgence. He was the quarterback 3 in week 7 when he got the start. He was the quarterback 24 in week 8. There was a bye in week 9. And then he came back in week 10 and was the quarterback 9 on the week. Now he gets to take on the Baltimore Ravens, who give up the 2nd most points per game to quarterbacks in the NFL. You cannot run on the Baltimore Ravens, so Russ will have the opportunity to throw in this one. I like Russell Wilson as a low quarterback 1, a solid streaming option in week 11. So all of those matchups are at home. I'm going to verify that. Versus Seattle, versus Atlanta, versus Baltimore. At home, they're going to ball out. We're going to move on to the running back position now, but before we do that, please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying the podcast so you can become a fantasy football prodigy. You don't want to miss the next podcast. I got 2 running back starts of the week for y'all. We're going to start with running back start of the week, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions at home versus the Jacksonville Jags. Jacksonville gives up the 5th most points per game to running backs on the season. This game has a 47 point over-under, and Detroit is 13.5 point favorites. That means that Vegas is expecting Detroit to dominate and to put up plenty of points in this matchup. The Lions are one of the best teams in the NFL, and Jacksonville will once again be without their starting quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, meaning it'll be Mac Jones under center again. Needless to say, I expect the Lions to dominate this game, meaning there should be plenty of rushing opportunities for their closer, David Montgomery. I think he's going to have a chance to ice the game away and put in work on the ground. He's the running back 13 on the season in points per game, and this is the perfect game script for David Montgomery to absolutely dominate, especially just given the fact that, you know, in a game, he's not super involved in the passing game, so the fact that they will most likely be leading, that means that they're probably going to try to run the ball quite a bit down the stretch. You know, we've seen this team put up a ton of points with Jared Goff barely having to do anything at quarterback. I think this could be one of those games where Montgomery and this rushing attack just take over. So David Montgomery is a high running back 2, a really good threat to get in the end zone and get a lot of volume in week 11. Next up, this one is a little gross. Okay, like I said, I don't want to give you obvious starts. So David Montgomery is a guy you can pretty much start every week, but I particularly like him this week. Now I'm going to go with a guy that you probably don't want to start and haven't been starting. And if you have been starting, it hasn't been going well for you. And I can already tell you that this guy is not going to be on my TikTok account because he is not someone that I want to put out there as endorsing publicly to the masses. And I could see it going poorly. I'm not going to lie to you, but his name is worth mentioning because he was once a great player. And this is a really good spot where if he has a solid game for fantasy, I would not be surprised at all. I could see this going either way. So that player is Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns on the road against the New Orleans Saints. It has, I mean, needless to say, maybe this is underselling it, but it has not been great production-wise for Nick Chubb since returning from that devastating knee injury that he sustained last season. He came back in week 7 of this season, and since then he's actually seen really solid volume with 11, 16, and 15 carries in those weeks, respectively. It just hasn't amounted to much for fantasy. But coming out of their week 10 bye, the Browns take on the Saints, who give up the 4th most points per game to running backs. Nick Chubb is not a must start, but if you're dealing with injuries or bye weeks and you just need a running back to start, Chubb is a guy who he used to be a good player. He's recovering from the injury, so we'll see how long it takes for him to, return to form if he ever does. But it's a good matchup, and he should see solid volume on the ground. He's a really good bet for 12 plus carries, and if depending on the game script, he could see 15 to 20 carries in this game. It really just depends on how the team wants to use him, how he's feeling coming out of the bye week, and if the Browns are able to sort of set the tone and actually have the opportunity to run on the ground. I should also add too, he has been bad for fantasy, but he played, week 7 was his first game back. He played the Bengals. He saw 11 carries, only turned into 22 yards. Luckily, he fell in the end zone. That was his first game back. We'll give him a break. The next week, he played the Baltimore Ravens. That's a brutal rush defense. That's a team that you throw on and you don't run against. So 16 for 52. It's not great, but second week back from the injury, tough matchup. And then he played the Chargers, another tough matchup on the ground, 15 for 39. The average yards per carry just hasn't been good. Not involved in the passing game, but another week removed from the injury, coming out of the bye. This is the best matchup he'll probably have seen since coming back from injury. And I think you're hoping that he falls in the end zone as well. So he's a solid low running back to play this week, and you're hopeful that he gets in the end zone. Those are my 2 running back starts of the week. So, I'm cautioning you guys about Nick Chubb. If he doesn't perform well, I don't want to hear anything like, "Oh, dude, I started him over McCaffrey." No. If he's on your bench, like he's on one of my benches, I have some leagues where I'm stacked at running back. I'm not forcing him in, but I've seen some teams out there where, hey man, you need someone to start. Like, it can be ugly. So anyways, we're gonna move on to the wide receiver position. So wide receiver start of the week, George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers at home versus the Baltimore Ravens. This game has a 48.5 point over-under. Baltimore gives up the most points per game to wide receivers, which is great for Pickens, who is always a big play waiting to happen. Russell Wilson is a solid streaming option at quarterback this week. and Pickens is his number one target. You can't run on the Baltimore Ravens, so the Steelers will have to look to produce through the air if they want to compete in this game. Since Russ took over as the starting quarterback in week 7, Pickens has actually been the wide receiver 6 in points per game. He's dealt with quarterback issues and had inconsistencies throughout his career, but with this matchup and the connection that he has shown with Russell Wilson so far, this is a week where you really need to get Pickens in the lineup. He's a mid wide receiver 1 play with upside in week 11, because we know George Pickens can win you a week if he hits on a big play and gets in the end zone. That's what George Pickens does. And is that true? I'm going to verify that stat. So since he took over in week 7 until now, Pickens, is he really that high? I put this, it's in my Google Doc, but yeah, he's tied for 6 with JSN. Week 7 to 10, wide receiver 6 and half PPR. And by the way, half PPR is the scoring format that I go off of, because I feel like that's kind of the standard nowadays. But anyways, we're going to move on to another guy that I really like. Sorry, my jaw, the last like month or two, I don't know, I feel like I hurt my jaw. So if you see me like doing stuff like that, it's just because like I'm trying to work something out over here. But I digress. If you're doing the audio only, just imagine some really disgusting looking guy just flexing his jaw all over the place. It's not a sight you want to see. Honestly, just stay on the audio only. It's probably for the best. Definitely don't head over to Fantasy Football Prodigy on YouTube and subscribe. We would hate that. Moving on. Wide receiver start of the week, Calvin Ridley at home versus the Minnesota Vikings. You can't run on the Vikings. Their run defense is dominant, but teams are forced to pass on them, and the Vikings do give up the 3rd most points per game to wide receivers. Calvin Ridley had a really rough start to the season, but he has been the wide receiver 5 in points per game since week 8, which coincides with DeAndre Hopkins getting traded away from the Titans. This is also right after I was forced to drop him in a league where I needed to make a waiver wire addition. So he was bound to get hot after I did that. That's just the way it works in fantasy football. I should actually just tweet out every single time that I drop a player, because more than likely they're going to win people championships. It's just how it works. I could do a whole episode on the players that I've dropped that have turned into Hall of Famers, but you can look me up on Twitter, Fantasy Football Prodigy. My @ is actually NFL ASAP. I should probably change that to like FFP or something, but at NFL ASAP. Me with a Teddy Bridgewater jersey looking at US Bank Stadium. It's a beautiful field. But anyways, I'm getting distracted. Calvin Ridley gets hyper targeted, and he is the passing game for Tennessee. The only concern is Will Levis, who's been shaky at quarterback, getting rattled by that nasty Vikings defense and those blitz packages. But Calvin Ridley is hot, and he's a good bet to make a big play or two in this game. He's a mid to low wide receiver 2 play with upside. So if you're debating between a couple players, just know that Calvin Ridley, he can disappear from time to time. He has been known to do that, but he can also win you a week. So look at your matchup. If you're going up against a really good opponent who is projected to beat you by a lot, if they're a super team and you need that upside, go with him over someone who's going to get you, 5 for 50. So that's my advice with Calvin Ridley. It's a good matchup. Next up, wide receiver start of the week, Courtland Sutton versus the Atlanta Falcons. This game has a 45-point over-under. Atlanta gives up the 10th most points per game to wide receivers. Courtland Sutton has quietly been solid for fantasy lately. He had that primetime Thursday Night Football goose in week 7, but since then he's been the wide receiver 26, 7, and 7, averaging 16.3 points per game. That makes him the wide receiver 6 in points per game from weeks 8 to 10. Not bad. He has 2 games with over 100 receiving yards in that span. That is something that we honestly didn't think was possible for Courtland Sutton after seeing him disappoint in that Russell Wilson-led Broncos offense the previous couple of seasons. I didn't know he was capable of doing that. I mean, the year before, he had double-digit receiving touchdowns, and he still wasn't really that good for fantasy just because he wasn't putting up yardage. But Bo Nix is actually, like I said earlier, he's underrated. Like, he's moving the ball. This offense, I'm not going to say they're clicking like they're a super team, but they can move the ball. And Courtland Sutton is the clear number 1 option in the passing game. He's not a must start, So in one of my leagues, I'm debating between Sutton, Jawan Jennings, and DeAndre Hopkins. I was really debating between Sutton and Jennings. Hopkins against the Bills, I think that's a game where, we might see the Chiefs run a little bit. And then Jawan Jennings, I do love the matchup, and I almost made him a start of the week as well, but he popped up on the injury report later in the week, like I said. So that right there might be enough of a tiebreaker to where I would just go with Sutton. If Jennings is fine, then he'll probably be good for fantasy too. But whenever a player pops up on the injury report late in the week, it's always a little iffy. So I believe he was limited in practice last I saw. I don't want to give fake news here, so I'll look it up. But I'll shout out Jawan Jennings as a bonus start. But yeah, he limited with an ankle injury on Thursday. He was a midweek addition to the injury report, meaning he likely picked it up during practice. So monitor to see what happens for the rest of the week. Monitor the news. Like I said, I'm recording this on Saturday the 16th. So, check Twitter, check the news. Don't believe everything you see on Twitter, but if there's an actual report like, oh, he's going to be on a snap count, maybe don't start him. But back to Courtland Sutton, he's not a must-start option, but he's a low wide receiver 2 play if you need an option. And I was about to say he's touchdown dependent, but he's really not. Like I said, he's put up 100 passing yard or 100 receiving yards in 2 of the last 3 games, and I believe he has a passing touchdown in that stretch. Was he the one that did that? I'm pretty sure he was the one that did that. So, anyways, did he do that? Am I making stuff up? It's Courtland Sutton passing touchdown. I'm looking it up. Did he not do that? Oh no, Philly special. Bo Nix catches Courtland Sutton's pass for 6. Yeah. You guys called me a liar. Why would you do that? Okay, here we go. Passing. His passing stats. Ready? He has 2 attempts, completed both of them for 30 yards and a touchdown on the season. So, if Bo Nix didn't work out, maybe they would just have to put Sutton in there as the quarterback, because they've been looking for a quarterback for a long time, but I think they found one. But anyways, that Arby's is coming back up. Sorry, that's gross. We have the meats. Anyways, moving on to the tight end position. We're going to go. I'm not biased. I'm not biased at all. I don't know why you would think that. TJ Hockenson of the Minnesota Vikings at the Tennessee Titans. Hockenson missed the start of the season while recovering from a season-ending knee injury that he sustained last year. He came back in week 9 and he saw minimal involvement with only 4 targets. He caught 3 of them for 27 yards. The following week, in week 10 though, his usage went way up and he saw 9 targets, catching 8 of them for 72 yards. Hockenson is a fantastic player who was on an absolute tear last season before that brutal injury. Really, really sucked, but he was dominating. The tight end position is gross, and if he is going to see that type of usage, he is automatically in the conversation as being a quality starter at tight end. So in week 11, I like TJ Hockenson as a mid-tier tight end 1. And then next tight end start of the week, it's a gross play. It's a deep league play, a deep streamer. Maybe throw him in a DFS lineup depending on his price. But Jonnu Smith of the Miami Dolphins at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders. This game has a 44-point over-under. The Raiders give up the 5th most points per game to tight ends. Jonnu is actually quite involved in this Dolphins offense, much to the chagrin of the Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle managers, but he's averaging 6.2 targets per game since week 5. While I would love to see Tyreek Hill get going and take this game over, honestly, there's just a really solid chance that Jonnu Smith gets his handful of opportunities himself, and neither Tyreek or Waddle are like super hyper targeted. He's a good yak guy, yards after catch, so he can actually do something with those targets. He doesn't need 15 targets to do something for fantasy. So, it's gross, not a must start by any means, but he is a high tight end 2 if you're desperate at tight end. Those are my starts of the week that I had written down. Per usual, I forgot to even write down anything about defenses, so we're just going to kind of wing it, because if anyone cares about DSTs, we're just going to kind of rapid fire this. Vikings are a smash play on the road against the Tennessee Titans. Will Levis is bound to turn it over and get sacked quite a bit, and that game has a low over-under. 39.5 point over under. So at the very least, I don't think the Titans are going to score a lot. But on top of that, there should be opportunities to generate turnovers and sacks. The Lions at home versus Jacksonville. Mac Jones is not gonna. He's not gonna light up the Lions. He's just not. Houston at Dallas becomes an interesting play with Cooper Rush starting at quarterback. The Cowboys looked terrible last week against the Eagles. Packers against the Bears. The Bears offense looks broken right now. So, and the Packers have a solid defense, and they've historically kind of owned the Bears. So, I think that's a game where I don't think Chicago's going to score a lot, and Caleb Williams is probably going to take a lot of sacks because that's kind of been his go-to thing this year. Miami Dolphins at home versus the Raiders. You always want to target the Raiders, and the Dolphins defense actually is pretty solid, and they looked pretty dominant against the Rams the other night. So those are kind of my favorite plays. You could play the Rams against New England. You know, Drake May is a rookie quarterback, and the Rams have been pretty solid for DSTs lately. 49ers versus Geno Smith, divisional game. I could see Geno maybe throwing a pick or two in that game. The Broncos defense has been really good. They're playing Atlanta. It's not the best matchup, but the Broncos defense is good enough where I could see Kirk maybe throwing a pick and taking some sacks, but not super into that. But the defense is good enough where you could maybe just roll with them if none of those other options are available. The Jets against the Colts. The Jets just got lit up by the Cardinals, and they've had a couple really bad performances this season. So you do run the risk of them getting kind of dominated, but the Cardinals are a much better offense than the Colts, who will be starting Anthony Richardson, who can't complete more than half of his passes. He'll probably throw some picks. And then the last really good play would probably be like the Saints at home versus Cleveland with Jameis Winston starting. He's always a bet to turn the ball over, even though I love Jameis Winston. He is a bit of a turnover machine at times. So those are kind of my top starts. Hopefully some of those are available. But yeah, that's going to do it for the episode, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed. Please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying. Drop a like if you can like wherever you are listening. Leave a positive review. Tell me how great my advice is. And if I'm wrong, you know what? Shooters shoot. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I've never been wrong this season. I've never been wrong. So anyways, that'll do it. Good luck in week 11, everyone, except my opponents. I will see you all in week 12 as we come back victorious, and I'm hoping that I'm 10-1 in all 3 of my leagues again. Peace out.